understandable politics, we continue our grand journey, a new series and a new continent. Behind us are Africa and Latin America. The next stop on the map is multicultural Asia, and immediately three countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Laos. New markets and promising partners for Belarus. Is the sanction pressure really a time of opportunity? Who is against the unipolar dictate of Western values? Places where Belarusian TV cameras have never been. People, cities, enterprises that know, value, and respect Minsk.
I highly appreciate Belarus's prospects and believe that trade with Vietnam can significantly increase. Colonialism began in Indonesia, and it ended here as well.
We burned our cities to keep the Dutch out.
You have many years of experience in developing a very dynamic agricultural system.
Belarus, under President Lukashenko, will be a very strong country in the future.
I think we need a leader with a confident position like that.
Belarus produces some goods that we don't have.
My parents rode a Minsk motorcycle. We made money with it. In Laos, they know the Belarus tractor and the Minsk motorcycle.
We really need the support of both governments and presidents.
We cannot ignore the potential of the EAEU region.
In Vietnam, we do not support sanctions. Indonesia is an agricultural country with many farmers who need equipment.
A piece of Belarus in the large hypermarket of a vast country. We understand that Belarus is good at producing dairy products.
This is chocolate, President.
You have something that other countries don't, and you should cherish it.
Independence Square is the main point of the Indonesian capital. Under the scorching sun, we try to shoot the first footage after arriving in the city. It's quite challenging. Belarusians are in high demand in the center of Jakarta. Hundreds of photos in half an hour. Indonesians love this kind of interaction. They are always happy to welcome guests. Mentally kind and open, and yet, not long ago, there were hundreds of years of slavery and famine from the Dutch and others. But they didn't hold a grudge against the world. They started working hard, channeling their energy into developing their now free country.
I was in Minsk, and I saw many large buffaloes or bison, many bison. I visited the Belarusian industrial enterprise. I drove a large tractor with huge tires.
He calls our mining dump trucks tigers and Belarusian women some of the most beautiful in the world. Jokes that he almost twisted his neck in Minsk. Although, of course, it wasn't just the women's beauty that surprised him.
I saw Belarus as an advanced country, especially in technology.
Indonesia is actively implementing technology into its rapidly growing economy. GDP growth rates are enviable, averaging 5%. And such offers from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are not made to everyone.
Yes, we hope that Belarus can have joint production with Indonesia here. It could be a hub or access to the Southeast Asian market. I see great potential in this kind of cooperation. For example, one of Belarus's specializations is massive tires, and we are the largest exporter of rubber, so we can complement each other. We can have this kind of joint production and be mutually beneficial to each other.
We share the same values and uphold social justice. In general, we speak the same language. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs continues to compare Jakarta and Minsk. Mentally and politically, there are no barriers to a leap in trade and other areas. The Belarusian bison, by the way, has perfectly adapted to the local zoo and has been delighting visitors for a long time.
Why go to Indonesia? Because Indonesia is the largest country in Southeast Asia, a very large market, a country that is friendly and neutral towards both Russia and Belarus. These are opportunities for selling goods produced in Belarus. First of all, we are talking about Belarusian industrial goods. Agricultural machinery, tractors, BelaZ trucks, and MAZ trucks. Let me remind you, the mining industry in Indonesia is quite developed. This is a very wide range of opportunities, so cooperation between Belarus and Indonesia should
Speaking the same language for Indonesia is not just a common phrase. The country is inhabited by more than 300 different ethnic groups. They have 1,000 dialects and languages. People from different islands do not understand each other. And English is just a salvation for them. Skyscrapers in Jakarta grow like mushrooms after rain, with all kinds of architecture. Japanese and Korean builders seem to compete in originality. The glass facades reflect the achievements of modern Indonesian history. The capital skyscrapers should not be misleading. The standard of living in the country is not uniform. Only 10% of residents have high incomes. About 15% live below the poverty line. Their expenses do not exceed $2 a day. At the same time, they are very lucky with the landscape and geography. Indonesia is located between two continents and at the intersection of many trade routes. There are also many natural resources underground. There is enough labor on the ground that the population is almost 280 million people. And the already large economy has every chance to grow further. Indonesia has recently been showered with complimentary assessments. A new industrial country of the G20, a new Asian tiger, a regional leader, and a future giant of the world economy. Indonesia is also a country that produces a lot of its own goods. The automotive industry in Indonesia is very developed. Indonesia has serious agriculture and mining industries. Oil and gas, yes, and many other sectors. Few people know that Indonesia is one of the world leaders in food production because, for example, almost half of the world's instant noodle production is in Indonesia. Indonesia also holds strong positions in the coffee and tobacco markets and other goods that are often used in everyday life, so Indonesia plays a significant role here. Indonesia is one of the few Asian countries capable of producing military equipment, including complex weapons from drones to submarines. In the framework of joint projects with others, but capable, because many countries are directly dependent on imports here. Therefore, from an economic point of view, we talk about Indonesia as a very powerful state, which today ranks 16th in the world in nominal GDP and does not lag behind in many other indicators. Several facts indicate that the local economy is doing well. The main logistics in the island nation is by air. On the largest islands, Indonesia has already built 400 airports and is constantly adding new ones. And 2 years ago they launched the most ambitious project. The authorities allocated tens of billions of dollars from the state budget to build a new capital. Not long ago, this country was called Terra Incognita for business. Today, it is predicted to become the new Asian tiger. Although, judging by the pace of development, it is already quite a mature editor. And the plans here are not small. For example, to move the capital, and not just move it, but build it anew in an open field. From Jakarta, it should move to Nusantara, on another island, and become 4 times larger. An already huge metropolis, this will be the largest project in Indonesia's history. Belarusians have been invited to help build the city of the future. There are several reasons for such a decision. Overpopulation of Jakarta, crazy traffic jams, constant flooding. They say that the capital in some areas is sinking by 15 to 20 centimeters a year. In the old city, there is even visual evidence. This sign shows that the northern district of the capital has sunk the most over the past half-century by 4.5 meters. A sinking city, that's what many experts call Jakarta. Groundwater extraction, planning mistakes, and poor city management, but experts increasingly give a grim forecast. By 2050, 95% of the northern part of the capital will be underwater. That Nusantara is at least a symbol of the nation's potential is hard to argue. The preliminary estimate alone is 34 billion. Indonesians are asking for equipment, products, and any help we can provide. For them, this is the construction of the future.
Jakarta is an old city. Here you seem to plunge into the colonial past. Architecture, names, cannons on the square remained after the fierce struggle with the Dutch, and even these canals are the embodiment of the invaders' engineering thought. But they miscalculated something during construction. Standing water in such a climate turns into a breeding ground for infections. Today, tourists stroll leisurely in the old city. Locals try to entertain them. People who had their resources taken away for years now play guitar for guests for a couple of dollars and sell inexpensive goods by the roadside. To understand and negotiate with a partner country, it is important to know not only its present, but also its past. Yes, Indonesia, like Africa, was a colony for many years, a Dutch one. We were colonized in our history for more than 300 years, and slavery, famine, this really happened in Indonesia. From the 17th century to 1955, the islands were called the East Indies. An interesting fact, the average height of Indonesians is 163 centimeters, while the Dutch are 182. Therefore, tall people are still not liked in the country. Colonialism began in Indonesia, and it ended here as well. At least, that's what the locals say. 300 years under Dutch oppression ended at the Bandung Conference in 1955. About 30 countries from Asia and Africa decided to say a firm no to colonialism. Thanks to this meeting, 5 years later in 1960, the UN had the Year of the Black Continent, and a particularly bitter irony of fate. Colonialism was killed in a building built by the Dutch for songs and dances. And then, in 1955, Bandung was dubbed the world capital of Asia and Africa. Since then, the spirit of Bandung has been an important part of the mentality. By the way, it was after that conference, where a document on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence was adopted, that Indonesia proudly declared itself the third democracy. Amsterdam was furious. Although Indonesia became independent in 1945, the Dutch tried to regain control several times. Too tempting a peace. There was a big war in some cities like Jakarta, Surabaya, Batavia. In Bandung, there was no big war, but we tried to defend our independence by burning our city at that time. We call this moment Bandung Lautapi. The center of Bandung was mostly burned, and this was our attempt to drive the Dutch out so they would get nothing. At that time, we didn't have the strength to fight the Dutch. We didn't have weapons, we didn't have heavy armaments, and we only thought that we didn't want this place to be used by the Dutch. Tea, sugar, coffee, quinine used to make malaria medicine, food, slaves. The Dutch took away literally everything they could lay their hands on for 3 centuries. Surprisingly, Europeans don't feel guilty. Bandung is a popular historical tourism spot for Dutch residents. They find places where their great-grandfathers served and happily share photos with the locals. You can imagine the reaction. Well, of course, the history of the world always has two sides, good and bad. Yes, beautiful buildings, which we call Art Deco-style buildings. We have many that combine Eastern and Western cultures, blending in the architecture. That's also the Dutch. The problem is, they think they humanized us. But in my opinion, if they hadn't come here, we would have our own culture. By various estimates, the Dutch period cost Indonesia millions of lives. Just the war for independence from 1945 to 1949 claimed 200,000 lives. But now there's a new threat, neocolonialism. By the way, Indonesian President Joko Widodo has repeatedly spoken about this, a figure who is also very interesting to us.
Lukashenko and Indonesia's most popular politician have a lot in common. Judge for yourself. A man of the people, not a bureaucratic leader, he won the 2014 election by a large margin and again 5 years later. And today his approval rating exceeds 80%. His biography is laborious. He made and sold furniture, was a company director. Even in a country of Western values, where capitalism is the foundation of development, his approaches are very popular with society. He doesn't hide behind closed gates, actively engages with the public on various platforms, plus he increasingly looks towards social programs. The market is the market, but people want to feel the support of the state. In Indonesia, they plan to introduce free lunches for school children, look into supporting the population in buying housing, help pregnant women and new mothers. And the Indonesian leader is also a peacemaker. In June, Joko Widodo even went on a tour of Europe with diplomacy, harmony, and good services. The goal was to find a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine. Such similar positions have made Indonesian society take a closer look at Belarus, where despite the 10,000-kilometer distance, they say the same thing.
Mr. Lukashenko, I see, is a great leader of Belarus. Very strong and principled. He is a very kind person. Also, when I was in Minsk, I met him personally. He is a very kind person, and I believe that Belarus under Lukashenko's presidency will be a very strong country in the future.
His Excellency, Mr. Lukashenko is a very strong man, a strong leader who greatly respects his people. He has been promoting the development of the Republic of Belarus for many years. I think we need such a leader with a confident position. This does not mean he is a dictator. Strong means decisive in his policies for the benefit of his people. Our presidents have a lot in common, that's true.
Indonesia is one of those countries that did not rush to impose sanctions against Belarus and Russia. This also reflects President Widodo's firmness of character. This approach is fully supported by the local establishment. Here they want to work with those who value and respect their partners. Indonesia follows the principle of active independence in its foreign policy. Active independence is a universal principle developed by the first Vice President Muhammad Hatta. It means that Indonesia is active in defending its interests and independent in forming its political stance on many issues. Therefore, for example, Indonesia avoids joining any politicized blocs. Indonesia avoids participating in any politicized actions. For example, we see that Indonesia takes a neutral stance on Western sanctions against the Russian Federation, including the Republic of Belarus and many other countries, and adheres to the belief that sanctions are not an effective tool. Again, consensus is needed, the interests of all powers must be considered, and the world order cannot be built on coercion. Some countries, I don't want to name names, play football. Every time you start to understand the game, they change the goalposts and the rules. Therefore, it is very difficult for us to achieve mutually beneficial cooperation due to these constant changes in rules. I think your president and ours understand the clear parameters of our cooperation. No one will say one is better than the other. We are equals. We will sit down and talk face to face. We had an experience when we were in unequal positions. Someone sits in a big chair and someone on a small stool. Something like that. But there are always problems, especially logistical ones. The situation in the Suez Canal forced container ships to enter Europe by completely circumnavigating Africa. Goods arrive several times more expensive. When we have logistical difficulties, even non-political ones. Remember the time 2 years ago when a ship blocked the Suez Canal. We were losing money. Peace is our greatest dividend. And we need reliable friends. Belarus is a reliable country with very clear advantages that we know about. We, like you, are looking for unconventional markets. We need to dig deeper, discuss further ways of cooperation. Moreover, Joko Widodo's course seems likely to continue. In March 2024, Indonesia held presidential elections, and the victory went to Defense Minister Prabowo Subianto, whose inauguration will take place in the fall. Widodo, according to the constitution, looking at the Menara from the Indonesian tower, it's hard to believe this is on an island. But in the ocean of the global economy, Indonesia has great prospects. The domestic market and demand, like these skyscrapers, will only grow. And the need for technology skills and food products, of course, too. There is hardly a country moving forward at such a giant pace. Establishing a presence here means being close to one of the future world leaders. The map of Belarus's presence in Southeast Asia includes another important colorful point. That's Vietnam. From Jakarta to Hanoi is about 3,000 kilometers and 4 hours by plane. We will cover this distance in just a few seconds.
Whether towers or temples, such structures firmly rooted in Southeast Asian architecture hint at the wisdom with which every step is taken here, especially when it comes to choosing a development course or partners. Hanoi confidently combines traditions with flexibility, allowing it to balance when external conditions are particularly stormy without losing sight of national interests. Today, Vietnam keeps pace and holds strong positions in the ranking of countries with the most active economic growth rates. Belarus and Vietnam have long-standing relations that began developing during the Soviet Union era. Thousands of Vietnamese students studied in Belarus, and our country helped in the formation of an independent Vietnamese state. It must be said, even today there is a lot of that atmosphere on the streets of Hanoi. The hammer and sickle were Soviet state symbols, and remain symbols of the communist movement today. Vietnam is among the top 5 countries in the world where the Communist Party is the dominant political force. Its leading role is felt at every step, whether it's red flags, banners, or schoolchildren in pioneer scarves. And also the ubiquitous presence of the party's founder, Ho Chi Minh, whom the Vietnamese affectionately call Uncle Ho. The veneration of the founder and the entire communist movement is understandable. The party united the country during French colonial rule and ensured an effective transition from a command to a market economy. The Doi Moi strategy adopted in the 80s gave the Vietnamese economy more in 3 decades than all the previous seemingly progressive years.
Now there is competition between powers. It is difficult for us to form our relationships, but we will try to have good relations with everyone.
In Vietnam, this multipolarity is called bamboo diplomacy. This unique foreign policy course yields concrete economic results. In just a few decades, Vietnam has moved from the category of poor and underdeveloped countries to being among the top 5 ASEAN economies, behind only Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia. GDP here consistently grows by 5 to 7% annually, and in the post-COVID period, records in export-import turnover were broken. Being in the center of the region, the competition between the US and China is especially felt.
We see that now there is a migration of production from China, production of transnational corporations. For several reasons. First, because it has become cheaper to produce here. The second reason is that there is a sufficiently qualified workforce to carry out these tasks. and we must also follow this path.
The lion's share of Vietnam's exports are high-tech goods, phones, and computers. This economic and trade potential pushes many countries to strengthen ties. Belarus has been moving in this direction for more than 3 decades. That's how long our diplomatic relations have lasted.
I highly appreciate Belarus's prospects and believe that trade turnover from Belarus to Vietnam can significantly increase. We have 3 main areas: economy, investment, and tourism. Vietnam greatly values investments in high technology and heavy industry.
A direct trade corridor has been open for us since 2016, when a free trade agreement between Vietnam and the EAEU was established. From Vietnam to Belarus come rice, textiles, and agricultural products. The main export items from Belarus remain fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, dairy products, and machinery. The list is quite modest, considering the scale of the Asian consumer market. We need to activate more high-level contacts between governments, between parties, and so on. For what purpose? To create the main mechanisms for implementing these relations in all aspects. Initially, the agreement's actions saw trade turnover reach $200 million from $120 million. These figures cannot be called a breakthrough, let alone a limit. And it's only partly about the distance. The reasons lie elsewhere, the hesitation of partners on different sides of the continent, experts believe. Asia has long shed the label of the Third World. It is self-sufficient and does not need the patronage of more developed powers. You can only come here with an equal and mutually beneficial dialogue, which Belarus offers. In terms of investments, as of the first quarter of 2024, Belarus has 3 investment projects in Vietnam with a total investment of $32,250,000.
Returning to Jakarta, the official population is 10.5 million people, with the surrounding areas almost 34 million. We were lucky. We filmed during Ramadan, when literally half the city went on vacation. Believe me, it's still a shock. Parking in Indonesian style looks like this. Hundreds, no, not cars, but these 2-wheeled helpers. They are the kings of the local roads. Here they say Indonesians live on mopeds. Public transport in the city is poorly developed, and this is essentially free. 1.5 liters per 100 kilometers, with gasoline costing $1. And riding with the wind in such a climate is worth a lot. They say almost every resident of this 30 million metropolis has a moped. Moped riders in Jakarta are the kings of the road. They don't follow any rules. If they want to overtake, they do it on the right, or maybe on the left. With such traffic, it took us an hour and a half to travel a couple of kilometers to the shoot, making you want to walk, but there are no sidewalks here. Indonesia is generally an atypical country, the largest island nation in the world. The archipelago has about 18,000 islands, although no one knows the exact number. Most of them are not only small and uninhabited, but also unnamed and sometimes just disappear underwater. One of the most densely populated countries in the world is also located in the most seismically active zone on our planet. 400 volcanoes, 80 of which are active. Up to 90% of all global earthquakes and 2/3 of all volcanic eruptions occur in this region. The main prospect of Indonesia is its population structure. Just imagine, almost half are school children. They will become the workforce and the main driver of the economy in the next 20 years. And they predict it will rank 4th in the world. Politicians are betting on the youth. The local government tries to speak their language. Such videos are very popular on official accounts. The simplest and most understandable form for those constantly on their phone. This is how the message from the local foreign minister looks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. To our brothers and sisters in Palestine, may their suffering end soon. May the war and oppression stop soon.
In this sense, Indonesia has a huge advantage. Thailand, Japan, and other countries in the region have to invite labor from outside. But this situation is also a big challenge. The level of education needs to be raised, and feeding 280 million people is quite a task for the state. It's no surprise that Indonesia imports certain types of food products. Belarus is one of the suppliers, a piece of Belarus, in the large hypermarkets of this vast country. There is no Made in Belarus label here, but our contribution is undeniable. Belarusian powdered milk is in high demand in Jakarta and other cities. Local companies produce their dairy products and baby food from imported raw materials and ask for increased supplies. Besides Indonesia, Belarusian exports also go to the Philippines and Singapore. Yogurts reach there too. The total contract value exceeds $40 million. Food security is a special focus in Indonesia. The country has a huge domestic demand for goods.
And we are discussing with our Indonesian partners and friends the possibilities for expanding cooperation in this area. In particular, we are talking about mutual recognition of halal products, halal certificates, and the accreditation of Belarusian dairy enterprises. Overall, the economies of Belarus and Indonesia are largely complementary. We buy from Indonesia what we don't have in Belarus. For example, palm oil, cocoa butter, tobacco, rubber, seafood, industrial products. And the opportunities for expanding this cooperation are quite large. The potential is great.
It's not surprising that the Ministry of Agriculture is called the second most important here. There are about 40 million farmers in Indonesia. Coffee and tea were once brought here by the Dutch. Now Indonesia produces kopi luwak, the most expensive coffee in the world.
We understand that Belarus is good at producing dairy products. We need a huge amount of dairy products. Belarus has them. All we need to do is try to understand each other better, what you need and what we need. What needs to be done to facilitate our trade relations? Real changes require even more interaction between countries. Because talking is one thing, but we need to do even more.
The ministry's territory is essentially a separate block. There are even its own markings and road signs. Many buildings and facilities, employees have their own uniforms. A total of 10,000 people work here. About 6,000 in this building alone.
Food security is currently a priority program for us, as you know about the food security issues due to climate change and geopolitical tensions. You know that this disrupts the supply of not only agricultural products, but also affects agricultural production in Indonesia.
Making the agricultural sector more modern and technological is the path the country has been actively pursuing in recent years. Teaching farmers to work with modern machines, use digital technologies, and focus on processing. But the country is heterogeneous, people live differently in different regions, so the modernization process is long and complex.
Implementing new equipment requires adaptation. We have special places in our country, and we need to know what technologies Belarus currently possesses to understand how we can use them in our conditions. The ministry has adopted a special document in this regard called Standardization of Agricultural Mechanization. This way we can work together with various government institutions and then decide how exactly we will implement Belarusian equipment in our country. We can work together.
Industrial downstreaming is also about Indonesia, opening as many productions as possible. In our terms, import substitution.
Indonesia is implementing a policy to attract investors and assembly plants to its territory. And to sell equipment here, it must contain a share of local components which reaches, in some cases, up to 30%, up to a third. Therefore, it is necessary to find local partners who will produce this equipment here in Indonesia together with our Belarusian enterprises. And this is one of the important directions we will be working on.
To avoid dependence on foreign supplies, they choose a simple principle here. We'll do everything we can ourselves. What we can't do, let others help.
You have the technology, you have years of experience in developing a very dynamic agricultural system. We can cooperate, use some of your equipment, study how you conduct your agriculture, understand how we can jointly develop and create a cooperation model beneficial to both countries.
The local GDP volume is $1.3 billion. These funds need to be utilized. The lucrative market has a queue of major investors: Japan, China, South Korea, the USA. There are no problems with partners here. Quite the opposite. Jakarta itself chooses whom to deal with. Indonesia is also a gateway to the ASEAN market for Belarus. 10 Southeast Asian countries, a population of 700 million, a combined GDP of nearly $4 trillion, and its share in the global economy is steadily growing. The association's headquarters is in the center of Jakarta for a reason. Indonesia is the most powerful and influential state in the regional organization. So, if the country signs a free trade zone agreement with the EU, our goods will more easily bypass tariff barriers and enter this huge market, for which all the major world powers are fighting today. Negotiations are active. The next round is already in July. Participants note that the process of concluding a trade deal has significantly advanced. Jakarta plans to finalize it this summer. The local business community eagerly awaits the trade agreement between ASEAN and the EAEU. Such an economic giant won't be easily toppled.
We cannot ignore the potential of the EU region. It has a market of about 450 million. We also have our large market of 270 million. The rationale for this cooperation lies in this: we must have mutually beneficial conditions for both regions. I also know that Vietnam already has free trade with the EU. Now we are also waiting for a similar mechanism, because there are many advantages to be gained from this cooperation.
For Belarusians, the prospects here are much greater than just exporting goods. Pleasant words from the Vietnamese, which undoubtedly need to be backed up by actions. A solid legal foundation has been formed between the two countries for developing and strengthening cooperation in many areas. The intentions were confirmed at the end of last year.
Of course, we are currently facing many difficulties due to the global slowdown, but in Vietnam, we do not support chances against any countries. Based on friendship, long-standing friendship between the two countries, we will seek options, approaches to overcome difficulties, and develop relations, especially trade and economic relations between our countries.
Mr. Hai is well aware of the points of contact between Belarus and Vietnam. As an ambassador, he represented the interests of the Asian state in Minsk. The most challenging time for us was the pandemic, sanctions, and an attempted coup. He saw the determination of Belarusians led by their leader to defend their own.
And he showed courage and legality in defending the country, defending the people. What the people have already created over a long time. I still remember his words. At some event, he said he would never give up his beloved. Many people think he's very strong. Often they told him that you have something that other countries don't have and you should cherish it.
Belarusian products on store shelves here mostly include rapeseed oil, cereals, dairy products, and exports. Food exports to the Vietnamese market have reached $1 million. Our producers do not intend to stop there. The market capacity allows for a significant increase in supplies. Moreover, we have obvious advantages over competitors. New Zealand, Australia, France, Poland. Belarusian milk faces no competition from local producers. If you compare them with the same fat content, the taste is different. Belarusian milk is richer. In today's turbulent market conditions, they talk not so much about expanding the range, but more about the need to create joint production. Today, there is a project to build a dairy plant, using Belarusian technology and based on Belarusian raw materials. The plant could be built on this site within the next year. Yogurts, ice cream, butter, cheeses are planned. The production of the most popular items and the risks have been calculated multiple times. They grow proportionally with the presence of sanctions.
Very good.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Our transportation costs are very reasonable.
That is, one container costs about $2,000. And now it has increased to 4,500 or a little more.
This also increases the cost of Belarusian and Vietnamese products. This reduces the competitiveness of Belarusian goods in the local market.
The company Hunga can be considered a conduit for Belarusian KANU. Today, they are partners with several of our manufacturers, including Mazda. Since 2019, a joint venture for importing and assembling trucks has been operating in Hungyan. They built a test road, prepared assembly, welding, and painting workshops, and adapted the offered positions to the local market.
We had to reformat in two directions. The first direction is in accordance with technical regulations. We refined the platform, reducing its size. We improved the side and rear protective devices. Overall, these were minor adjustments that did not affect the machine's design. The second direction is in accordance with market requirements and the demands of major buyers.
Belarus competes with manufacturers who have a short logistical distance to Vietnam, India, China. Belarus's trump card is its reputation. Our equipment played an important role for the Vietnamese during the state's formation. Belarusian tractors and the Minsk motorcycle were the only means for farmers in the northern region to navigate off-road, harvest crops, and feed their families. This is still remembered and appreciated here.
My parents rode a Minsk motorcycle. We earned money with it. I remember its sound and exhaust smell from childhood. Over time, they work well, no engine problems. Getting spare parts is a big problem. We even contact students studying in Belarus to help buy and bring them.
Vietnamese farmers in Tây Ninh province, where we are now, are 2 hours from Ho Chi Minh City. Of 3,000 tractors, 70% are Belarusian. They say it's quality tested by time, and not without reason. Our tractor, not an American or Chinese one, was featured on the local 200 dong banknote.
Asia is a region with a great future. This part of the world sets the agenda for global development today. The president of Belarus has mentioned this many times in various formats. The global economy is shifting to this continent. It's important not to miss the opportunity. For Belarus's long-range export, Asia is undoubtedly a special direction. The head of state visited this super promising country back in 2013. It was already clear then that we needed to roll up our sleeves and work together.
Deepening relations with Southeast Asian countries is one of Belarus's foreign policy priorities. Indonesia is a key country for promoting our interests in this vast region.
Belarus doesn't just want to sell its goods. We are ready for deep industrial cooperation and the creation of joint ventures. There is a galloping demand for industrial products in Asia and Africa today, so we need to enter with our offer. This task was set by the head of state at the big industrial meeting in April this year.
The President of the Republic of Belarus instructed to activate cooperation with the countries accredited by the embassy, Indonesia, as well as Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. Projects that would help us establish a long-term presence in this market include creating assembly plants in Indonesia and other countries in the region for our flagship Belarusian industries. Indonesia is an agrarian country with many farmers who need equipment, and Belarus could provide the machinery you mentioned. This includes low-power tractors and motor blocks that farmers can use on their plots.
In Indonesia, two things are particularly valued: quality and modern technology. Meet Swoosh, the name of the Indonesian high-speed train. 11 trains, 8 cars, and 350 kilometers per hour. one of the fastest in the world. Bought from China.
In 6 months of operation, we have transported over 2 million passengers, with 14 to 15,000 passengers per day. During peak season, such as long weekends or national holidays, this number can reach 20 to 21,000 passengers per day.
Prices are steep. A trip from Jakarta to Bandung, 142 kilometers, costs about $20. This doesn't stop local governors and officials from using it. Jakarta is so overcrowded that many find it easier to commute daily than live in the capital.
About 20 people have already used our transport 100 times. We are truly happy about this. It really allows people to save time traveling from Jakarta to Bandung, taking 30 minutes instead of 3 hours.
Such a train sets the bar for Jakarta's expectations. They want to develop just as quickly and shoot forward like an arrow. They plan to extend this expensive transport artery to all the islands.
Indonesia's statehood rapidly developed in the 1940s. To unite and bring together these 18,000 islands, a common idea or foundation was needed. The country developed 5 principles: democracy, social justice, internationalism, nationalism, and pride in oneself, but not thinking we're better than others, and of course, faith in God, summarized as Pancasila, a fist of justice. The ideology proposed by the country's first president, Sukarno, remains the foundation of Indonesia today. There's even a state primer that explains all this. It's understandable for children, with pictures included. But even more important for any Indonesian is Garuda, the mythical bird, Indonesia's emblem. At its center is Pancasila. The claws represent the number of national holidays with the inscription, Unity in Diversity. This position also applies to global conflicts.
The people of Indonesia believe our foreign policy is free and active. Both Russia and Ukraine are our friends. It's very difficult when 2 of your friends are in a conflict like war. We want this war to end as soon as possible because it's bad for everyone. There are many victims and casualties. We want both sides to start diplomatic negotiations to resolve this war. This is how people in Indonesia think, because both countries are our friends. Russia has been our friend for a long time, and so has Ukraine. We wish they would negotiate to settle this conflict.
Only a representative of a country that has felt the weight of war can speak like this. For Belarus, it was the Great Patriotic War. For Indonesia, the situation is even more complex. Taman Mini, or Indonesia in miniature, is an exhibition of national achievements. Every region, every island comes here with its unique features, from national costumes to full-fledged temples. This is a miniature map of Indonesia, but every local will tell you it lacks a very small but important piece. It's about East Timor. The topic of East Timor is extremely painful in Indonesia. From 1975 to 1999, the country's army fought fierce battles with the Fretilin organization, the Revolutionary Front for Timor's independence. Previously, Timor was a Portuguese colony, then joined Indonesia. But the neighbors were not satisfied with this situation. Fretilin was sponsored by Americans, British, and Australians. The region's life turned into a living hell for many years. Concentration camps, guerrilla sabotage, both sides used the most brutal methods. Just imagine, in 1970, East Timor had 600,000 people. By the end of the 20th century, a third less. In 2002, under the UN's aegis, the region was recognized as independent. But local skirmishes continue to this day.
Acres of mined territories remain hostages of American aggression. This is Laos, Vietnam's western neighbor. In the war America prefers to call secret, not acknowledging its direct involvement, a record was set for bombing intensity. For 9 years, bombs fell on Laos every 8 minutes.
While the West bombed and mined, help came from Soviet people. Military pilots delivered essential supplies and evacuated civilians, with 20,000 flights and dozens of Soviet soldiers killed on Laotian soil. The monument appeared not long ago. In 2022, amid growing global tensions, it became a special symbol and reminder of the arduous path to independence, resonating equally with fraternal nations today.
In this war, Americans actively used cluster munitions to increase the impact area. Today they generously supply Kyiv with them, thus turning Ukraine's territory into uninhabitable land. This is confirmed by Laos's sad experience, where a dozen provinces are still considered potentially dangerous.
When it was announced that similar munitions were being used in Ukraine, Laos was the first country to officially state its position. They said it was an inhumane practice that must end.
Safety is one side of the coin for unused lands. Simple. For a country where half of GDP comes from agriculture, these are direct economic losses, which are slow to recover after the pandemic. Rising external debt, declining exports, rising inflation.
Our main task remains how to restore the economy. We currently face economic difficulties. Inflation has been very high recently. This is our top priority. Another priority is drug trafficking. This is also a priority for us.
This situation makes Laos heavily dependent on aid from other countries. China's presence is especially felt as they open factories and implement cross-border projects here. Laos has become part of the international transport network, a railway route within the Belt and Road Initiative.
We are an agrarian country and most people work in agriculture. We also have a mining sector that attracts many foreign investments, and we focus heavily on hydropower. We have good political relations, but we need to develop other areas. Trade, investment, tourism, these are areas that need development.
Laos has plenty of natural resources. Foreign investments help develop the mining industry. However, the overall situation in the industry is not very optimistic. This is where Belarusian technologies can be very useful.
Belarus has never made friends at the expense of another country's interests. It has always aimed for mutual benefit from cooperation for both sides. In this regard, Vietnam, like all of Asia, all regions of the global South and East, respect this position of our country and are ready to increase interaction in any areas. As much as we can agree, negotiate, and promote.
There's not much Belarusian presence here yet. In the most successful pre-COVID years, trade between Belarus and Laos did not exceed $13 million. The entire volume of supplies from Laos to Belarus, mainly rice and tea. At the same time, we are ready to respond to the needs of the local economy.
In Laos, they know the Belarus tractor and the Minsk motorcycle because these products have always been in demand. Laotians also associate Belarus with fertilizers. We are interested in promoting Belarus in Laos, as well as fostering mutual dialogue, which can strengthen the positions of both countries on the international stage.
This small country is currently attracting the attention of all of Southeast Asia and other regions. Laos is taking on the chairmanship of ASEAN. the organization allows for a unified development vector for the entire region and, importantly in our time, protection from any external influence. For Laos, this platform is a good opportunity to assert its interests, primarily in attracting investments.
Many of the leaders in Laos are graduates of our universities, having received their education in Belarus during the Soviet era. After a long pause, the issue of training and retraining personnel is relevant again. This is a near-term prospect. Closer still is the vacation of Laotian children in Belarusian Zubryonok. This is another friendly gesture from our country.
I still remember when we lived in Minsk and tried Belarusian apples for the first time. We tasted delicious bread and soup for the first time. We were impressed by the flavors of products like sour cream and stewed beef, which we had never tried before. I feel that Russians and Belarusians are very friendly and peaceful.
It's no wonder that all great deeds start with simple human connections. If not rulers, then ordinary people, whether in the center of Europe or Asia, understand that the time for acting alone has passed. The entire globe feels the global confrontation of world powers and economic turbulence, which can only be avoided in orbit.
Space is one of the areas where cooperation between Russia and America still exists. During the flight, representatives of these countries see our Earth from space in the colors of peace, green and blue. Space unites, and space flights are always for the development of humanity, so that all countries can live freely and develop. I believe that space unites.
Pham Tuan is the first Asian astronaut. His flight in 1980 was 10 years ahead of Japan and more than 20 years ahead of China. He says he followed the expedition with Marina Vasilevskaya, the first Belarusian astronaut, and sends a special cosmic greeting to her and all of Belarus from the first Asian astronaut.
Istiklal translates to independent. The main mosque of Southeast Asia is a shrine for nearly 86% of Indonesia's population. It can accommodate 120,000 people. By the way, Indonesia is the largest Muslim-majority country in the world, with 273 million citizens. But this mosque, like the religion, has another important unifying aspect. 350 ethnic groups, hundreds of dialects and languages, which otherwise couldn't be united into one nation. But this doesn't mean that other faiths are not respected here. For example, on the famous Bali, Buddhism is practiced, and right next to the Istiklal Mosque is an old Catholic cathedral built by the Dutch. The main architectural feature of the mosque is a spherical dome with a diameter of 45 meters. It's like the Eye of Allah. Istiklal was built in 17 years. The grand opening took place in 1978. By the way, the building's design was conceived by Frederick Silliban, a Catholic.
The philosophy of this architecture is very open to people. It embodies 7 principles of goodness. These are the 12 pillars of Islam, 12 men. This mosque contains a huge number of symbols of our independence. Istiklal is the independence of Indonesians.
The mosque is a place of tradition. For example, until recently, prayers were called with the help of the baduk, the largest drum in the world, 300 years old. By the way, Istiklal was visited by the future US President Barack Obama. But today, locals and the former White House resident would hardly find much in common. The fact is, Indonesia, as a Muslim country, strongly supported Palestine, condemning Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, where, according to various sources, up to 50,000 civilians died in the first month of the war.
For example, we can organize fundraisers to help our Palestinian brothers, but we will do it discreetly. We are used to solving issues through dialogue, not aggression, like our brothers in other Muslim countries. Without weapons, without wars, in the future we need to unite with each other. It doesn't matter who we are. For me, humanity has no color. Anyone can enter this mosque.
Also, in the conversation, Mr. Umar noted that religion helps locals endure economic shocks, of which there have been many in the island nation's history. However, Now the Asian tiger seems to have strengthened for a long time.
Despite the overwhelming majority of Muslims, Indonesia is multi-religious, and religion is even listed in the passport. Here is proof: an Orthodox church near Jakarta. An amazing place and amazing stories of how people far from orthodoxy come to it.
How did orthodoxy come to Indonesia? After all, it's a different country with a different predominant religion.
By God's will. Interesting plots fit into larger narratives here. We met Anna completely by chance. Russian language, we quickly started talking. Do you have an answer to one simple question? Why shoot at people who just want to live their lives?
Every person has a universe inside. I don't know what drives people to shoot at living people.
She moved here from Donbass, thinking it would be for a couple of months, but it's been 10 years. She found housing and work, but reading the news is still painful.
Donetsk is a place for heroes. The people who live there today have been living there for all these 10 years. Every day there are casualties. Every day there is destruction. It's very scary. Donetsk residents are certainly heroes, and they live knowing that at any moment something could hit.
The last time she was in Donetsk was in 2021. 4 months, she says briefly, everything stayed there. Her dream is also simple, to return home.
Earlier, I could still consider, for example, temporary work options somewhere in Europe, in the United States. Today, I can no longer consider it because I simply can't handle it psychologically and mentally. Probably staying in these countries. Indonesia is a salvation. Well, as you said, because of the spirituality there, what we see in the news and when talking to people, unfortunately, we can only wish them wisdom, probably.
We are writing the interview with Anna under a tropical downpour. She calls Western politics a cold shower for the whole world, in whose aggression thousands of faiths are drowning, pushing the world into an abyss.
They don't hear us. If they heard us, it would make sense to say something. But they are not interested in what we think and say. Therefore, I believe that we need to preserve ourselves first and foremost. Preserve ourselves and resist evil when it knocks on our doors.
And the last phrase in the interview, which seems worthy of a national credo for some politicians.
People, wake up. Follow the right path. Stop doing evil.
The intertwining of religions and cultures. But at any end of the planet, people talk about the same thing. We want to create and work together, not to flinch from war, but if we cry, only from happiness. Minsk is often cited as an example here, and they send greetings to all of Belarus, a country that has never threatened anyone, and that has never betrayed the main rule of peace.
Hello, Belarus.
Belarus on 4 continents.
We need to do everything possible to establish relations with Minsk.
I was harassed for my trip to Belarus, but we need to be friends. Due to sanctions against Belarus, I lost €500 million. Italians say that we are now paying for the sanctions. Italians understand that they are being lied to. There are people for whom the migration crisis is big business. They can never forgive President Lukashenko for being a man of the people. We have many common values with Belarus.
In fact, many Italians support us. They just remain silent.
My wife is Belarusian. I am a happy man. NATO and America are to blame for what is happening in Ukraine.
I lost my sight in prison when I was falsely accused.
Italians are starting to understand the essence of the problem. And often even teachers at school come up to me and say, Katerina, we support you. We just can't talk about it.
Our very strong economy has been ruined. Here is the role of the EU. A significant number of Belarusian manufacturers continue to work with Italy despite the existing difficulties. Belarus is a wonderful country, and I believe the doors will open.
The Slavyansky Bazaar deserves the highest praise.